Hi Twitch, and welcome back. I'm Abby again, just like I've been Abby all day. I'm here with Deepak. Hi Deepak.
Hello.
Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. We are back talking about my favorite topic ever, which is containers on AWS. And Deepak is here to answer all of our questions. So if you have questions, keep throwing them in the Twitch chat. We have just about a half an hour to do the whole containers dance today. So keep sending the questions. Moderators are standing by, so they can answer all of your questions too. Still me, yes. So first question, I know that Werner did kind of the overview this morning on what the landscape looks like on AWS, and I think we do that a lot. So let's start with what's new. What's new for ECS? What's new for Fargate, launch types? What's new for EKS?
Yeah, sure. Last time we talked on Twitch was actually when we launched Fargate.
Yeah.
And it's been about 4 months since then, and our teams have been hard at work. Some of the functionalities that we launched and we are super excited about are, apart from Fargate launch, EKS preview that was launched, our container networking, we have now launched Fargate Platform 1.1, which enables service discovery. We have enabled service discovery for ECS, generally, regardless of which launch type you use. We also launched container metadata, so you can actually get task information, and we also launched container health checks.
So let's dig into some of these. So I know that service discovery is probably the most recent one. What's cool about native service discovery? Why is that something that we all should care about?
Sure. Service discovery enables you to have a managed experience with a native integration with Route 53 auto naming. So you can have multiple backends as part of your service. Let's say you don't really have a requirement for a load balancer, but you want your services to be able to talk to each other by a certain name. So you use DNS names to register backend IPs for your services. So when a new task comes up, ECS has built this nice integration with Route 53 where we register those as backends for your service. So when you so it's basically gets you client-side discovery there.
So if you're familiar with kind of the container side of networking, usually containers that are on the same physical host, they can communicate with something called the local loopback interface. So that's 127.0.0.1 or localhost or whatever we're calling it today. Service discovery, though, is for the second half of that problem, which is I'm not on the same host as the other container that I want to talk to. How do we talk to each other?
Correct.
How do I talk to a different service? How do I talk to a database? How do I know when my service scales up? Because we all have this beautiful auto-scaling now. What happens when I scale up or down? And people have done this with Lambda functions, or they've done it through load balancers, and everyone's always like, doing it through an ALB doesn't count as service discovery. And it's like, yes, it does, because alternatively, I'm making DNS records myself, and I don't really want to do that.
Correct.
So it's one of those things that it's solving an annoying problem, and it just works. So you don't have to think about, can this service talk to the other service? It just happens.
Correct, exactly.
So let's talk about, I know that one of the biggest differences for people between the ECS with the EC2 launch types, which is the traditional ECS ones, and Fargate, which is the new management list ones, it's a new networking type called AWS VPC. Can you talk a little bit to the networking changes and what we've kind of built to make things work with tasks as a primitive?
Yeah, sure. So we launched this new mode called AWS VPC Mode. Prior to that, your options were bridge mode or host mode, where you had to share the same network interface. Now from a task perspective, a task is a unit of your application, and you want to have your network policies be as close to the application that you're deploying. What this enables is, with a dedicated network interface for your task, we enable you to be able to do that so that your security groups, you're not reduced to a lowest common denominator. You don't have to open up ports you don't want for a particular task. So it gets you a high level of isolation. Not only that, from a routing perspective, from within your VPC, you don't have to think about, well, how is my task A going to talk to task B if it's in the same VPC? Your same routing rules apply, your security groups, your NACLs, they all apply just like they do for EC2 instances. And moreover, it's not something that you have to manage as a user. So I want that isolation. It does not come at an additional management cost. You simply define that I want AWS VPC mode, and what we do on the back end from ECS does its magic of provisioning in your network interface when the task comes up, and also deprovisions it. So, and the IP addresses are taken from your private subnets, and you can also optionally, when you're using Fargate, choose to have a public IP assigned to your ENI.
I think too, is it speaks to what Deepak Singh, so this is Deepak Dayama, and Deepak Singh is the GM of containers here, and I think the way that he put it in the last couple months with the State of the Union at reInvent was that it focuses on making the task the primitive rather than the EC2 instance. So instead of having to exactly have the least common denominator, so step back out to the EC2 level to do things like security groups and networking, I can do it at the task level, which is my unit of work now.
Correct.
So I don't have to manage EC2 instances just to work with containers.
Correct, exactly.
So you said a couple minutes ago that we've been like just about 4 months since we went GA with Fargate.
Yes.
What are you hearing for customer feedback in terms of like what do you think is next? Like where do you see kind of Fargate going from here?
Sure, I can talk about some of the customers who have deployed production workloads, and we can talk about some of the things we are already thinking of. Some of our customers, like Product Hunt, have actually launched their production workloads on Fargate. We have a slew of customers, such as we had Ancestry, who was running on Fargate. So we have a lot of customers already running production workloads. They did a POC on Fargate really early on, and now, for example, Product Hunt's case, they are running a product called Ship on Fargate and are end-to-end running on AWS because of that, because of the ease of management and not having to manage multiple services. With respect to feedback, we've also gotten, our customers also want us to expand to more regions, so that's certainly something high on the list. We expect to expand our regional footprint later this year. We also announced at reInvent that Fargate will support EKS, so that's something that is also high on our minds right now. We'll continue to enhance from a customer feedback perspective, improve our number of metrics that we emit, because debuggability is pretty important for customers. They want more metrics, more logging options. So we'll give more choices in that area and provide more, just emit more data there.
So 2 follow-up questions. I think my first one is probably one of the most commonly asked questions that I get from people at talks and conferences and stuff like this, which is, so Fargate sounds amazing, and if I don't have to manage anything, why would I want to still run things in EC2 mode? So why would I still want to run things in what traditionally, it's a little confusing because colloquially we call them both ECS.
Yeah.
So traditional ECS versus Fargate, which I'm using as shorthand for the EC2 type launch type. So when would I want to use the EC2 type for ECS versus Fargate if Fargate is the magical future of containers on demand?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I would like to add that from a service standpoint, you still use an orchestrator. So ECS is still the interface, still the API. You just choose a different launch type for those not familiar with the option here. So it's really a launch time decision whether I want to run it on EC2 or a Fargate.
I made a flowchart for this, by the way, because people kept being like, you can't call everything ECS. So I made a flowchart. So I will pass around a link to my really crappy flowchart.
That's an FAQ for sure. Yeah, we should probably add it to our website too. But with respect to the choices, it really comes down to what do you really care about from a feature perspective. Fargate, the way we are launching new features, just with the example of the recently launched ones, they are available for both launch types. But then there are also certain areas where ECS has been developed, and for Fargate, we are still introducing functionality. So I'll just take an instance of, for example, you want to run a GPU workload. You want to specify how many GPUs you want to use, or on a GPU instance, you should use EC2 launch type. You have purchased reserved instances, or want to use the spot market. We have a great integration with creating a spot fleet as part of your cluster creation itself to be able to take advantage of that. So EC2 launch type is great for that. You want to run Windows containers natively. Fargate does not support that yet. You can run .NET Core, but not Windows. So that's, again, something to think about.
I think a nice way to look at it too is a lot of it is about the level of control. Yeah. So with Fargate, a lot of the management work is happening for me. I can just throw task definitions at it, tell it some resource limits, but I don't have to really think about anything else. And that's awesome, But if I want more control, so if I want so GPUs or the spot market, or if I need to be able to run things as part of EC2 user data, as part of a launch configuration, those all belong, I think, right now still in ECS. So I think, for me, I think a lot of the choice is about control, and I think the follow-up question to that for a lot of people is, how do I know where to start? And if it were me, and so when I started using ECS, ECS was in beta, so there was no Fargate, but if I could make the same decision now, I think I'd probably start out with Fargate, and then I'd migrate back over to ECS if I decided that I wanted more control. Because I think Fargate right now is actually really easy when you can build with that in mind. Because I already am using the right networking type.
Correct.
I've had everything in my task definition. I never relied on EC2 user data. And it's pretty easy to flip back and forth because you're just switching the launch type. Yeah,
I agree. Also from a design perspective, you're making fewer assumptions on the underlying infrastructure.
Yeah.
So if that's the direction you would like to go in anyway, so I think that's the right starting point for sure.
The Fargate model to me feels a lot similar to the Lambda model in that everything has to be in your container definition or your function. That's where it lives.
Exactly.
You don't do anything with the underlying infrastructure. You don't have a lot of choice about it.
Yeah.
It's all of your configuration belongs in your container definition and task definition.
Exactly, yeah.
So speaking, I think, of everyone's favorite topic, for those of us that haven't been able to get into the preview, can you shed a little light on what EKS looks like right now? So how we're working with the community, what it feels like, a little bit about how EKS is actually working.
Yeah, sure. So EKS, which is the Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, we are we are in preview, and a lot of customers are giving us very valuable feedback. The way one of our tenets for EKS is to actually have a 100% upstream experience for our customers, because that's what they like about Kubernetes. And it's all about choice, being able to use Kubernetes in AWS as well.
I think, too, what stands out for me with Kubernetes is that everyone feels very strongly about the community. So the community, I think, in a lot of cases, is what makes Kubernetes so strong. Right. And something that we didn't want to take away when we're running EKS is the community aspect of it. So we're contributing back upstream. We want to work on projects in the community. I think you had something this morning about being certified?
Yes. So EKS is now conformant with Kubernetes, which is part of CNCF certification. That was announced as of this morning, actually. Yeah, very recent.
A secret, not quite announcement, but we'll call it a post-launch announcement.
Sure.
So if you missed the memo this morning, certified by CNCF.
Correct.
So let's see what. So I feel like people very rarely get an opportunity to talk right with kind of the service teams and the product managers. What do you feel like people should know about containers on AWS that's not making it out right now? That it's not commonly known, or things that people are wondering about that actually you have a really good answer for already? What am I missing?
Yeah, I think the way you want to look at containers for AWS is, it's all about choice of, ECS being, sort of from an AWS point of view, something that grew up in AWS, and then there's Kubernetes, which customers are accustomed to, and now we're working with the community to make it AWS native, right? And we'll keep working on those integrations with the community on that. But then it comes to also sort of at a platform level, what those choices are with respect to EC2, or if you want to just run it managed. The feedback we get is people want more managed, not less managed services. So that's sort of Fargate, and then we have ECR, which is the container registry.
So it's always a really interesting one, because I think you have two very distinct camps of people. You have the group of people that wants an incredible amount of control, that wants to write their own placement policies. They want to be able to edit things in the actual kernel, which affects how their containers run on top of that. You have the people that want a huge amount of control, and then you have the actual opposite of that, which is, no, manage more of my stuff for me. And sometimes I'm not sure which camp is bigger, because I think it depends on who your community, who you talk to the most often.
Exactly.
Because I feel like most of the people that I talk to, there's maybe a handful that are I need support for privilege flags, I need all of this, and then but it seems like the majority want the more managed one. So then
Yeah.
you have those people that want to use Fargate, but they want a very different thing from EKS that
Correct.
the other group wants from EKS. I think that's actually just a really hard community problem.
Yeah.
You want everyone to be happy.
Yeah, and it's just looking at the number of use cases containers enable, whether it's microservices or portability from on-prem or between environments, you run the whole gamut of different types of people who have built capabilities in these areas, so they're comfortable with more less managed capabilities too.
I think something that ECS has done really well from the beginning has been that you end up with kind of two paths, that you have a sensible default that you can fall back on, so that if I choose not to have an opinion on this, that ECS will schedule in a way that makes sense for a lot of people. It doesn't mean that, but it makes sense for a lot of people and there's a good default, but I can still customize if I want, but I don't have to, and I think that's the right model. Yeah,
that's actually how we think about it when we think about from a experience point of view. What do we see more often, and we constantly tune that based on customer feedback and preferences as well, because they also evolve over time and rather fast actually.
Yeah. So I saw actually a question in Twitch where someone was saying that by the time his apt-get install is done, the container is really large, which actually segues us really nicely what I also wanted to talk about, which is a really common kind of, I don't know how to describe it, it's one of those, a really common big question is, my deploys are slow.
Yeah.
And I think there's a ton of factors that influence that, and I think one of them is what we just saw on Twitch, which is, it's how big your container is. So are there some other ways that people could speed up their container deployments with, regardless of the scheduler they're using in some cases, but what are some things that I can look at when I want to speed up my deployments and I'm not really sure where to start?
Sure. I think from a infrastructure point of view, because Fargate provides this managed offering, it takes less time to actually launch your to a deployment because your infrastructure is ready for you by a service. You don't have to spin up a new instance and so on and so forth. So there's less work to do and you get faster deploys. The other thing is, an area that you're an expert in is how to reduce your footprint of your container images, right? And how to get the best, how to optimize that as well. And thirdly, I would say if you use a managed service like ECR, we do have, from an optimization standpoint, there are things that we can do to make sure that when you're launching, your pull times are faster, and your authentication is set up already. So we have, from an experience standpoint as well, you get to go from nothing to running very fast.
I think my favorite kind of top, I did not count these beforehand, so I'm going to say top 5, but it may or may not actually be 5.
Sure.
Container size.
Yeah.
The connection draining settings at your load balancer level, so there are by default quite generous, I think like 300 seconds.
Yeah.
So if you do not need, so connection draining is a time that it takes to gracefully drain your traffic off before cutting over. So as part of the deployment process for like ECS and Fargate, it drains traffic off of your older vision and then switches it over as soon as it passes health checks.
Yeah.
So you can drop that connection draining threshold down. And then you also can drop the timeout down, so how long it tries to health check it before the health checks pass. And then this is my favorite one, other than image size, but if you're not using alias records in Route 53, you can alias directly to a load balancer instead of calling the IP address of the load balancer, and you skip at least 2 jumps, I think, because you don't have to go out to the internet, look up the IP address, and then come back in. You can just use the internal alias between the load balancer and your DNS record. So. That was 4 or 5. I'm not sure which. Maybe.
Well, Fargate is 5, maybe.
maybe Twitch, and just Fargate itself too. I think the biggest one though is that it's a trick when you start off with containers, because if you follow how you would set up a server, you end up with this enormous container image. Because how I would set up a full Linux server is not the same way that I want to set up a container. Yeah. And then I end up and I'm like, well, my container is 2.5 gigs, and then I continuously deploy that container, and now I have no disk space. Yeah. Or if it's on Fargate, at some point I wonder if the Fargate team would be like, did you know that your container is huge? Yeah. Hopefully someone would tell me at that point.
Yeah, definitely like a lift and shift, you do end up with sort of really giant image sizes for sure. Yeah.
I had someone come up to me once and they're like, hey, I'm just getting started. I took my entire existing app and I just put it in a container and I'm really upset because it doesn't work. And I was like, life can be so much better than this.
Yeah.
We can get rid of so many things because you can get so many things for free with containers. You don't have to have everything in there, or you could separate it out.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's new let's talk a little bit about ECS itself. So we talked about Fargate, we talked about EKS in the community. Let's talk about the OG, so ECS. So what's new with ECS?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, from an ECS perspective, we have been on a region, we have expanded our footprint to a lot of regions. We did expand to Gulf Cloud region, for example. We expanded to late last year to Korea, to China. We also expanded so that's something that will keep on going the rest of the year. As AWS launches more regions, we'll be there being a core service. So from a functionality perspective, you should expect that all the features that we have been, actually all the features that we launched for Fargate, they are actually ECS features, first of all. So they apply for ECS as an orchestrator to begin with.
So I've gotten a couple of questions in Twitch, I think, about people, and I think we get these every time, about how do they get started? So that there's a lot of options. It can be a little overwhelming, and I think especially if you don't have a greenfield app. So how can I start from beginning and kind of follow the documentation? What is your recommendation for people that are looking to kind of get started building things with containers on AWS, knowing all the features that are out now?
Yeah, I think from a beginner's point of view, I would highly recommend starting off with our first run experience that we have with Fargate. The idea there is to not overwhelm you with a lot of cognitive overload and a lot of choices there, but rather to introduce you to all the concepts and constructs that we have, while just giving a sane defaults kind of an approach, which is, this is the image that I'm launching, just click, and so get your first application up and running in very little time. So that familiarizes you with all the aspects of specifying your task definition, visibility, so you should have that experience, as well as, integration with ECR there.
So I think ECR is actually I feel like it's like a sleeper hit. No one goes around being like, I love my container registry so much, but ECR is great.
Yeah.
And running your own registry was previously extremely frustrating.
Yeah.
And now it's that's one of those things that maybe I'm not cool, but I never want to run my own registry. I'm totally happy to have someone else manage it for me. And I can pull my images faster. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things which is, from a container registry point of view, it's built so simple and the integration is so seamless, you don't have to do more work to actually get your registry running.
Can you speak to what you think is coming up next for ECS and ECR?
Sure. You would expect us to, from a ECS and ECR perspective, more region launches. Logging drivers also applies for ECS as well. You will more metrics for the task level, cluster level. You will also see as, so there's a set of Fargate features which will all apply to ECS. They will all be common. We'll enhance on our service discovery capabilities. For example, today we support service discovery with AWS VPC Mode. We would also like to support that for bridge mode, for example, and host mode. So that's something that we'll keep investing in. From an ECR perspective, right now we're looking at how to improve being able to do tagging, for example, be able to follow your images where they're deployed, things like that.
If you're just joining us, I've seen a couple people say that they were a little confused on some stuff. AWS VPC is a new networking mode that supports tasks, which basically means each task is allocated its own ENI, so an elastic networking interface, which basically means that in ECS and Fargate, you get a private IP from your subnet with the choice in Fargate to have a public IP from your subnet. What Deepak just mentioned were bridge and host. Those are two of the original Docker networking types that are not AWS VPC. So right now, things like Service Discovery support AWS VPC, but bridge and host, so bridge uses the bridge network, host maps directly to the host network. We'd like to support some of the features that we built to work with our networking
all
type
networking
to
nodes.
work with all networking
Exactly.
types.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation, because a lot of customers actually, AWS VPC mode is rather recent, and they probably don't have a reason right now to move to AWS VPC mode. So bridge mode definitely is something that we have heard from customers about.
Especially because bridge and host have been the defaults for Docker for
a
quite a
long
while.
time, yeah.
So we are cool and made our own networking type, but you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
Some people are still using the other ones.
Yeah.
So there was a question, but it looks like Nathan Tabor answered it. I think my final kind of wrap-up thing is, we talked a little bit about getting started, but what about getting help? So if I think so the workshops I think are a really great place to start. So Arun Gupta and Nathan Peck and Brent have all done really nice workshops, I think, around getting started, which I think are really nice at explaining the concepts like what's a task, what's a container, how do you deploy this in ECS. But what about talking to the containers team themselves, like the DAs, or passing in feedback? Like, do you have any suggestions for people that are looking to kind of pass things on to AWS or get some help?
Yeah, so may I suggest actually, Abby would be a great resource to reach on Twitter, but we also have Brent and Nathan. Apart from that, I would recommend do not hesitate to reach out not only through our DAs, through social media, but from a support point of view as well. We constantly look for this feedback from our customers, so feel free to open those open those cases as well. So keep that coming. Aside from that, I would also like to highlight that we have, as you said, workshops like ECSworkshop.com. Get started with that.
Yeah.
If you have questions on it, we actually have some of it is actually our documentation is now open source. So give us feedback on that. We'll definitely love to hear more on that. Sometimes it's just a case of getting more information out there.
In general, also, AWS loves feedback, and it doesn't have to be about the container services. It could be about serverless. It could be about databases. It could be about machine learning. We love feedback.
Yeah.
So pass it on. Tell your account manager. Tell a developer advocate. Tell me on Twitter. Email us. Tell a friend. But definitely, we love feedback of any kind, and I think it's the best way to make sure that you help. Customers here are what drives our roadmap. So that's how the containers team knows, hey, actually people would like native service discovery. It's people like you that let us build the things that we build.
Definitely, yeah. Our customers drive pretty much all of our roadmap, and the more we hear, the better we can incorporate that for sure. Thanks.
So super excited because I think we're always hearing more from the containers team here. If you want to keep asking questions, keep passing them on in the chat, and the Twitch team will be forwarding them back on to the service teams later. So if you have a question, definitely don't hesitate to follow up. Thank you, Deepak, for joining me.
Thank you.
And we will be back in just a couple of minutes with more content from San Francisco Summit.